Hey everybody, it's Eric with What's in the Box Horror, and we're still doing the Meet the Authors of Texas AuthorCon 2, and today we have Seth Overton with us.
Hi, good to see you. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
So our first question, we just jump right into it and we talk Jason, Michael, or Freddie.
Jason. He Jason was the one that I kind of stuck with growing up. There's definitely Freddie and Chucky in there, but Jason is the one that sticks with me.
Yeah, for
And
sure. He's my favorite.
he was the one that I rooted for in Freddie versus Jason. So
Yeah, you know what? I did too. I did too. I thought that, and I avoided that movie for the longest time. And when I finally sat down and watched it within the last couple of years, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. It's a really fun movie. So, but yeah, I'm always voting for Jason too. So, and then I mean, I think the reason a lot of people like Freddy is because he talks and stuff. But I've always enjoyed the Jason movies more as a collective than I have the Nightmare movies. 1 and 3 are really good, but after that, it's kind of hit or miss. So.
yeah, they tried milking it for as much as they could, and then towards the end, just before they revamped him in Freddy versus Jason, they kind of just ran out of ideas, which was
Yeah.
unfortunate because the whole silent killer thing definitely took off with Jason and Michael Myers, and it adds something to the horror genre that I think that we don't get a whole lot of anymore.
Yeah,
We
for
we
sure.
just get we just get stereotypical stalkerish kind of characters, not ones that have that really brooding, foreboding aura about them. So yeah, Jason needs to make a better comeback. They kind of did him dirty recently.
Yeah, I didn't mind the remake. In fact, the remake for Friday the 13th is one of the better remakes, I think. But you're right; they just haven't figured out what they need to do with him, and he's
Mhm.
such an untapped. The whole idea is just a perfect idea. You could really kind of try. You can keep putting out the same movie, and it's not that big of a deal within the Friday the 13th franchise.
Fair
But
enough.
it grows really boring with Freddy, right? So
Yes, it does.
yeah, I totally get that. And I kind of you definitely get the same vibe with Michael. I mean, that definitely got tired really quick. I think after the
Oh, very
first two.
quickly.
So I wish they would have gone with Carpenter's idea and just done every Halloween a different genre within the horror genre, and then we would have had, I think, a whole bunch of fun movies. But
Well, I
um,
think the Carpenter just didn't exactly get the kind of backing that he really deserves for a horror director because his early work was amazing. Uh, then everything started changing in the multimedia world, and then he just stopped being listened to, which was unfortunate.
yeah, it's always terrible when that happens because you know, it's like they put him to pasture too early. You know, they still have
Too
great
early.
days. Yeah, for sure. So on the same kind of idea, we like to see, are you more team vampire or team werewolf? Which one do you prefer?
Team Werewolf all the way through. It's I mean, vampires have their fan base, they have their niche, but I also think that they can be very easily overrated. But I think my adoration for werewolves actually came from the Underworld movies, the at least the first couple, because they did werewolves very well, made them smart, cunning, and bestial rather than mindless, which is pretty awesome. And werewolves were my favorite monsters growing up as a kid, so I got to see plenty of that.
Yeah, for sure. And have you ever seen Dog Soldiers?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, I
I
think that's another one
honestly
that
that
does
was
a good
honestly
job.
that was a gem. That was a gem that was easy to forget. It kind of went under the radar after its first airing. But yeah, I finally got a chance to see it a few years ago.
Yeah, I thought they did a good job with making the werewolf smart on that one too.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. I mean, I don't mind a complete bestial werewolf idea, you know, but then it could just be anything. So it's a little bit better when they have a little something going on between the
Well,
ears.
they played a very good one with Silver Bullet.
Hmm.
Yeah, I I'm pretty sure that was based off of a Stephen King.
Yeah, Psycho the werewolf.
So yeah, exactly. And Silver Bullet like scared the crap out of me as a kid. It was perfect because even with the practical effects and Gary Busey of all people, which was awesome, uh, they just did so well with it, making a preacher a deadly werewolf going after a kid. It was pretty nuts.
Yeah, and they kind of made it almost as if he's a serial killer on top of being the werewolf, the way that he was, picking out his victims throughout the film and
Mhm.
targeting them. And then, like you said, going after a kid at the end to try and silence them. It really did add a lot. And especially because depending on when you see that movie, it came out when I was pretty young. So it was, you could relate to the kid more than you would relate to the adults in the thing. And so that
Yeah.
makes it 10 times scarier when you think that, oh, now you've got this beast targeting somebody like me. That's something I
Mhm.
have to worry about. So that adds to the horror of the whole thing. And I think that's the cool thing about werewolf movies is that, you've got if you, in the old days, you just slap teeth on a guy and he's a vampire, but they had to do
Right.
something to make the werewolves. And that's always what fascinated me is the practical effects. I'm a big fan of really good practical effects. I mean, I don't mind CGI and I like the fact that they can shortcut some of this stuff. But if you can find a movie that has really cool practical effects, those are the ones that I will consistently go back to and talk about and tell people they have to watch and stuff. So
Yeah, you got to give credit to the originals, such as the Wolfman, because the
mhm.
practical effects they needed in order to create that, it worked out so well for its time. And even with the Benicio del Toro remake of the Wolfman, they still kept kind of close to the roots, even with the CGI.
Yeah,
Watching that transformation was pretty cool. You don't get
yeah,
to see that kind of transformation with vampires. You just see them die, come back, and then try not to die again.
yeah. We did this the other day. We were talking to somebody who was a big vampire person, and I think but they were leaning more towards the scary vampires, like from 30 Days of Night. And then I
Oh, 30 Days of
mentioned,
Night. Yeah.
yeah, but those really could be anything. We didn't really I'd love to get more information about those vampires because they were almost werewolf like in how, bestial they were about everything. But
Mhm.
I also thought the vampires from Blade 2 were pretty, spooky.
Oh, yeah.
Just
Yeah.
the
The
way,
ones
yeah.
whose jaw could split. Yeah. That was a very cool way of taking a look at it. I know that 30 Days of Night had this very obscure sequel that was following all the other ones that survived the main character becoming one to kill their leader. I don't know if it explained any further, like what their people were, but
Yeah, I know it's out there. I haven't sat down to
purely,
watch it, but it was a fine movie. But like you said, it's more fun to watch these werewolf stuff and go back. And I love that one, the Del the
the
Benicio.
Benicio del Toro. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a perfect movie and I can easily see why people wouldn't like it, but it does capture the vibe of it. And I thought they messed up the ending, and that was the problem. But for the most part, I really enjoyed how it kind of mirrored the original and gave us that kind of path of him because it's more
Mhm.
of a tragic love story at that point,
Yeah.
and that kind of works better, I think, in those than some of the other stuff that they do, especially with the vampire movies and stuff. So, so you mentioned some like Silver Bullet and all those. What was the favorite movie as a kid that kind of got you on the path for horror as a fan?
Um, Honestly, one of the first horror movies that really stuck with me and kind of got me interested in seeing a little bit more was actually Dawn of the Dead.
Okay.
Um, I was a kid whenever I first saw that, and it was when drive-through theaters were like still a big thing, and it gave me nightmares for a few weeks because I think I was roughly about 8 or 9 whenever I watched it, and zombies really stuck with me because like even though it scared the crap out of me, I would start watching all these different zombie ones going all the way back to the very first Night of the Living Dead and every sequel or remake afterwards. So yeah, just by earliest memory, I think that was the one that kind of got me started with it.
Yeah, it's a great one. And then, so then that always makes me wonder now as an adult, which
Mhm.
zombie do you prefer? Do you prefer those slow, meticulous creeping at you zombies, or do you like the World War Z zombies where they're just a swarm of them? Do you have a preference, or do you just love
As
zombies?
a storyteller and as somebody that is a huge fan of fiction as a whole, World War Z zombies are prime. They're a hive beast that work off of each other in order to gain their goal. I can see why the slow lurkers, like back in the Night of the Living Dead stages, were preferred, because I mean, like anatomically speaking, it makes a lot of sense that they cannot function as well as
Mhm.
somebody that's still alive. But the idea of having this virus take over the entire like human anatomy to where the functionality is still there, that's just terrifying. Anytime that people think of zombies, they think of these creepy things that walk slowly, and all you have to do is just hit them in the head. But with these ones, like, they are terrifying. Like, they work as a whole unit and run at you. It's a lot like the creatures from The Last of Us, the runners and the clickers, like that kind of expansion and evolution of undead definitely makes the horror genre much more horrific, which is what we want.
Yeah, for sure. Anything that would make me have to run is terrifying. So
Yeah.
I would prefer to be able to, at worst jog away from a zombie. So yeah, I totally get that. But yeah, I don't like the idea that they're working together. And that's
Yeah,
what
yeah, that's terrifying.
I'm a big fan of Return of the Living Dead because it's so funny and campy and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
also they're so smart, and they're calling in, send more backup. We
Send,
need more because
yeah,
they're
send more
so
EMTs, send more cops.
right. I
Yeah.
love that. I love the idea that's scary too that they're thinking. And so I love that universe as well. But
And then the one that was explaining like why they crave brains, like it causes the pain to subside, and that was just creepy. The animatronics and the practical effects of that, it definitely gave us something else to think about with undead that can actually speak and think.
yeah, and I think that's also the fun part about zombie movies is those were the first ones that were really over the top with the gore. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's cool to see that and then go into, because now we have a lot of different gory, have Hostel and all that stuff. But I mean, we were introduced, I think, in with the zombie movies, especially if you're a fan from the 80s or
Yeah.
70s. So as an adult, what's your favorite horror movie?
As an adult, I always have to come back to a classic that also gave me nightmares, not for weeks, but for a few years, and that is Stephen King's It. And both of them, the one with Tim Curry as
Mhm.
Pennywise, that was the one that got me the most, because I had to think about it in the mindset of those kids that were being chased after by this entity, because that was just terrifying, using your biggest fears to just get more fear out of you before he consumed you. Then the one that has the Skarsgård kid, that one just kind of amplified it. I mean, the costume itself was ridiculous, in my opinion, but the mentality of the character still worked.
Yeah, I
And
thought the kids was really good.
yeah,
It one is
the
great. I hated it too, and I think you're right. I think Tim Curry's is a fun Pennywise.
oh yeah, he really knew how to play a
Hmm.
creepy, monstrous character. I mean, he did that with his own devil interpretation. I can't remember what the name of that one was called, but Tim Curry knew exactly how to scare the crap out of people.
You're talking about Legend.
Yes, that's what I
Yeah.
was thinking
Yeah,
of.
he's
Yeah.
amazing in that too. Yeah. Tim Curry's just amazing. And I think it was one of those situations like when they made Michael Keaton Batman. You're just like, Tim
Mhm.
Curry's going to be the serial killer clown from Stephen King, so you don't really, at that time, you don't think of him as more than Rocky Horror Picture Show, maybe. He's in Clue, he's been
The
in
guy
all
from
these
Clue,
things.
yeah.
And so a lot of people think of him as a funny guy. And so, I mean, I think that adds to the terror when you see how just amazing he was as Pennywise. Yeah, but
Mhm.
I thought the kid that they got to be him in the new movies was really good as Pennywise. The physical things he could do with his face and his eyes and stuff are
Yeah,
all out
like
creepy.
real Jim Carrey in
Yeah,
horror in horror makeup.
yeah, for sure. Um, so did you read a lot of horror as a kid, or did you have a book that stands out as the one that kind of got you on that path or whatever?
Well, the closest thing that I came to reading like horror books as a kid were R.L. Stein's Goosebump books. I
Mhm.
mean, they obviously weren't horror, but they were pretty creepy, especially putting yourself in the mindset of all these kids, because R.L. Stein was really good at that. Having kids read in the perspective of kids that were in very creepy, weird, horrific situations. But as I grew older, I started going into more like dark fantasy kind of thrillers, there's this one very obscure book called Peeps, which is almost like a vampire-esque kind of book that I just discovered one day in the library, and it was creepy, it was intense, and it worked. Then I started to get into Stephen King more because I was watching his movies. I was watching It, Children of the Corn. Oh hell, there were some other ones there, but I wanted to actually see.
Cujo, Christine.
Oh yeah, Cujo and Christine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I wanted to actually see like, all right, so these were all supposed to be books, right? So
Mm-hmm.
why not go to the source material? And I found out, and I thought the books were amazing compared to the live action versions of them. So I started reading more of them. I read it like probably about 5 times. Under the Dome, which was also a really good one. Tommy Knockers, everything that was turned into a live live show or a live movie. I read it just to see what it was like, and I understood why Stephen King was not a big fan of The Shining whenever it was made into a movie, because it didn't follow the source material. And I think he did that again with Doctor Sleep, which again was a great novel.
Mm-hmm.
So as an adult, Stephen King has been my favorite horror writer, and one that I've kind of stuck with, aside from probably H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe, which I use as a teacher to kind of give some ideas to my students. So those ones kind of stick with me more.
Yeah, those are all great. I mean, it's hard to argue with the classics,
Mm-hmm.
and even though Stephen King is contemporary to us, he's still a classic in
Yeah.
that way, that he's the ground. He broke all the ground for everybody to kind of sprout out of. I mean, I don't think there's a writer that does horror, even in the extreme world, that can't say there wasn't a time when they were a fan of Stephen King, or at least he put them on the path towards whatever it is they found or went to. So now I know you don't write horror, but you have it's more of a fantasy, right? A young adult fantasy.
Yeah, it is. Young adult, new adult. It's called The Mortal Gate. Uh, it's one where my characters get stuck inside of a new age virtual reality video game system, and they get stuck because somebody messes with it, and they don't know how to get out. So the only thing they can do is just play through and put themselves through some very tense situations to reveal what kind of people that they are in the game versus in real life.
All right, that's really cool. So I mean, we're talking. I mean, it sounds like 3 or 4 different genres right there, and I think those are some of the best books you'll get. Is the somebody that does, that's what when I write horror, I say everything is horror, and so I'm not just writing a horror novel. I'm writing a western that has horrific events, or
Mhm.
whatever, a book in the 60s, or I'm writing, a love story or something like that just has those elements. And I think those are the books that stand out, is when you can say, well,
Mhm.
because it looks like, I mean, the fantasy, and then you have the lit is really big. The lit, what is it, RPG? Is that what they call
Lit
it?
RPG. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really big. And then this is another point. I'm so happy you're on here, because I know some people think that the events all horror, and it's really not. We've got tables, we've got writers that are going to have stuff that are completely opposite, that have
Mhm.
their own genre, and a popular genre that people want to come and check out and see. Um, so what made you I mean, what was the idea behind the book? What made you decide this is the path I want to go? This is what I want to
Mhm.
write? Is it a reflection of you being a teacher? Is it the age group that you teach?
Uh,
Is it something like that?
kind of. It's also the idea that I have really stuck to my youth,
Mhm.
because before I actually sat down to write a full length novel, I was spending most of my time, if I wasn't either in college or working, I was mostly playing video games. And I get a lot of ideas from that because I had been writing stuff since I was a kid, but I never finished anything. And so when COVID hit, I needed something to do to, I needed something to get my mind working, and just droning out in front of a screen wasn't doing a whole lot. So I started sifting through all of my old notebooks and my old journals that I would like write story ideas with. And this one came up, and thinking, you know what, maybe I can actually turn this into something. And I did. It took me about 2.5 years to put it together between my job and just finding time. And I produced it. I couldn't even believe that it was done by the time that I was ready to have it published.
For sure. When did you
Uh,
publish it? When did it come
I
out?
published it back in 2021,
Okay.
December, and it has it was self-published. I went through self-publishing through Amazon and Kindle because I wanted to be able to write what I wanted and have
Mhm.
it produced purely through me. And it's worked out. It's got a few followings. It's still pretty new, still going up against all of the popular fantasy lit RPGs, but it's an accomplishment. And I wanted this to kind of reflect the human idea of trying to escape reality.
Mhm.
Because if there's one thing that I've noticed, especially as a teacher, kids these days, they really try to escape reality a lot, whether that is through video games or through their phones and their devices. And I just kind of took that a step further and go, what if the tech that we're so obsessed with actually got used against us and made us face our biggest fears, which is that we have to face reality. And that's what I wanted to accomplish in The Mortal Gate.
Very cool. Is it a self-contained story, or are you thinking it's going to be a series or
I'm actually working on a follow up right now.
okay.
It's going to follow some of the same characters, but put them in different situations that I wasn't sure if I was actually going to be able to make it continue. But the more people that I met that have actually read it and bought it from me, they keep asking me like, what happens afterwards? Can like, is there going to be something else like in the same universe? And I got asked so much that I'm like, you know what? Let me just try and sit down and see what I can do. So far, I'm about 8 chapters into my next installment, and uh, I'm hoping that I put as much thought and love into that one as I did my first one.
Yeah, I think you will. And I think it'll come a little easier too as you're doing it because the hard part was you sitting down and getting that first one done and
Yeah,
getting it out there. And so and it's not to say that the second one isn't hard to put out. I mean this is a piece of you, right? Chunk of flesh
right.
down here. So yeah, I definitely get that, but it will be a little easier because at least some of the questions that you had, you've already tackled. How to do
Yeah,
it, process of writing, all that annoying stuff that trips up writers. If I knew how much stuff was involved that had nothing to do with writing, you know what I mean? I would have been, oh,
right.
I'm
Yeah,
planned totally different for all the stuff I was doing. So I know that sometimes that can get in the way of a good. And then you have your job and everything else that's
yeah.
going on. So life gets in the
Because
way.
because I can't really compare my situation to authors that do this as a full-time job, because this was something that started off as a hobby and then slowly became like a small personal business. And I'm just now wanting to see it expand, and it's competing with traditional publishing versus independent, which a
Sure.
lot of independent publishing has come out in the last 3 years alone because everybody was sitting at home with nothing to do. All of a sudden, everybody became a writer, everybody became an author, everyone became self-published, and so it gets more competitive regardless of the genre, regardless of the writing style. And it's just something that we constantly have to deal with, that we have to constantly overcome, regardless if we are part-time writers or full-time.
Yeah, and we're also competing with, like you said, all the things that hold everybody's attention, video games,
Mm-hmm.
their phones, and
Yeah.
Netflix and everything else that they can,
Mm-hmm.
they have everything right there. So, are you interested in stepping outside of that, or do you think most of your stuff's going to always be within the same kind of genre, or do you
Oh,
have ideas for some other stuff?
I've uh, I've thought about branching out. I've been a huge like fantasy reader since I was a kid, and it's been one of the genres that has stuck with me. I've tried my hand at going like dark fantasy, kind of horror fantasy, and I didn't really like the direction that it was going, so I kind of put that on the back burner. It's really hard to step outside of what you first successfully did and then tried to do something different. Would I like to? Absolutely. I want to see what all I can put together. It's just sometimes there's that innate fear that it's not going to be as good as what you stuck with before.
Yeah, it's just one of those things you have to kind of push through and see what you can get out there. But yeah, I know
Mhm.
what you're saying. You don't want to waste your time putting something out that nobody's interested in doing, but at the same time, you don't know if maybe you're going to be the one that that's the one that's going to hit it for you.
Yeah.
Well, so you're a big fantasy fan. So what kind of what are we talking about? What do you like, a Tolkien, or is it like is there a specific
Uh,
writer you're really big into, or a universe? I mean, I was a big
I'm really
fantasy
big
fan
into
growing up.
uh, I'm really big into a lot of fantasy genres. Like I grew up a Star Wars kid,
Mhm.
through and through. Every
So do you prefer
single
the novels or do you like the comics more?
Honestly, I like the comics because I like the visual aspect. I started Star Wars visually and I like to enjoy it visually. I have not actually had a chance to read any of the novels that have been coming out, especially about the High Republic. I've heard good things about them. I just have not had the opportunity to really just sit down and try reading one of the scripted novels rather than graphic.
Yeah,
But
for
the
sure. No,
graphic
I'm a big
novels,
fan. I've read some of them. I'm not a huge Star Wars guy, but I've read some of the books. They're fine. But especially the stuff Marvel's putting out with the Darth
mhm,
Vader, amazing.
yeah,
Just the best stuff. But Dark Horse, I think, is the one that really did the best with the Star Wars comics. If you can get a hold of
yeah,
the old classics, those are the good stuff.
Dark Horse went above and beyond to try and expand on the stories of each character that was able to make it. It makes me wish that they would have went in a different direction with the three sequels that came out. Even though I enjoyed them, I enjoyed what they did for the most part, but I also think that there could have been a lot more potential if they would have looked at some of the source material from before.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, aside from that, I also was really big into Harry Potter
Hmm.
as a kid. I was a really big Potterhead. I love the magic aspect and how it goes from this very wholesome young story and then it develops and grows like a young adult, like a teenager, and it gets more and more intense and thought provoking and revealing all the way up until the very end of the
Sure.
story. And there are other ones that I've like really gone into, such as the Percy Jackson series. There is one that Stephen King called X-Men meets Lord of the Flies, and that was the Gone series. I can't remember the author's name by like to save my life, but it was one of my favorite one of my favorite book series in high school because it really was like Lord of the Flies meets X-Men, but it also met Stephen King's Under the Dome. A bunch of kids stuck under a dome that they can't get out of, and then they start developing powers. It was throwing three or four different genres into one mix, and it was the good kind of chaos. There is such thing as too much
Hmm.
in one read, but that one made it work somehow, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, I was big into like the Dragonlance and the D&D books in the old days and Robert Jordan and all that stuff.
I only recently started looking into R.A. Salvatore because I started picking up my D&D hobby again with everything that's been going on. And it's those R.A. Salvatore books, you wouldn't think that such developing stories that happen at a table can make such great stories in books. And I understand it now. It's awesome.
Yeah, the Forgotten Realms stuff, and that's where he comes out of.
Right.
Those are all really, really good. And then the whole Dragonlance series itself, the original
Mhm.
Chronicles. And then from there, they've branched out. And I stopped probably before the 90s. And there's continually,
Yeah, they're
growing.
still
I'm
going
sure there's
at it.
a bazillion I've never looked at. Occasionally read Star Trek, but yeah, it's just a fun thing about fantasies. And, it kind of pulls the sci-fi in there and you can just have this
Mhm.
huge arc of different things going on all under the same umbrella. And I think that's fun. And it sounds like the book that you've written is kind of like that. Just has all these different kind of things that lets the
Yeah,
reader enjoy everything.
Yeah, I've had reviews that have compared it to Ready Player One meets Jumanji, Dwayne Johnson style.
Hmm.
I've included a bunch of science fiction and high fantasy in the whole thing because I had to think if me as a video game player was actually stuck in one of the games that I played, what the hell would I do? Like, how would I respond to it? Because it's very different controlling something than being the one, I guess, controlled or in control, however you want to look at it, if you pick it up. And it was just one of the fun things to think about. What would happen if somebody was actually stuck inside of a game that they spent so long playing and then forget how everything works?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's just a fun thing. And then, like I said, you're going to have different notes. So, um, and then, so I've always wondered this: when you say it's YA, I mean, is that automatically within an age group, or does it mean content wise? I mean, what exactly are we
I
talking about?
I didn't exactly like the idea of it just being considered young adult fiction, because anytime I think of that, I think of Harry Potter, I think of the Percy Jackson series, I think of all the ones that I grew up with. But what I've got is something that I would like to consider new adult, because it definitely has it has language, it has violent scenes, and it has these existential crisis moments. I don't like how restricting that the idea of YA young adult fiction is. I like to have it expanded, especially as a teacher. I've seen and heard and witnessed kids at the age of 14 all the way to 18 saying and doing things that were not exactly young adult level.
Yeah, for sure.
So I kind of just channeled that into what I wrote, and therefore I don't really consider it young adult, even though I do say that anyone from the ages of about 14 or 15 and up would be very much interested in it.
Yeah, it's kind of like with the extreme horror tag. I usually say I write
Mhm.
extreme horror because I use the F word. It's just so you know that there's something going on in there that might be a little more adult than you're normally thinking. So, hey, I totally get that. I wasn't sure if this was specifically, if you went out and thought, I am writing this for ages, 12 to 16. So it's YA, and that's what YA stands for. But yeah, actually, I think what the way you described it's perfect. The new adult. Or,
Mhm.
because I mean, really what it sounds like is that you've written a book and that anybody of any age will enjoy it. And most likely somebody 14 and older will get where you're going with it. I mean, sometimes when,
Yeah, I just took my own experiences growing up and thought, what kind of book would have wanted to read at this time? And I think that I put it together, and it's for anyone that has kind of just sat down and thought, well, what would happen if I was actually in the situation, whether I'm a teenager, young adult, or even older?
yeah, for sure. Well, I just want to say thanks for coming on. We're at the end of the episode, and I just want to remind everybody, hey, we're going to be out Richardson, July 14th and 15th. It's a Friday, Saturday event, and there's going to be a ton of tables. You will find a writer that maybe a new writer, but you will find somebody writing the genre that you prefer, and maybe you'll find some new genres to dip your toes into. And it sounds like this might be one of the ones that people need to rush over and check out because it sounds like a fun book. So I just want to say thanks for jumping on, Seth, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks a lot, Eric. See you at the con.